Hey everybody, it's Greg Rice. We're here in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, and I'm with author and historian Paul Caranci. He's going to tell us about two of his books today, Wired and Scoundrels, both stories of political corruption here in Rhode Island that he witnessed and he was a part of. So I can't wait for you to see the interview, and I can't wait for you to purchase and buy this book to learn more. Hey everybody, it's Greg Rice from Nexus Property Management, and we're here today in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, and we're with author and historian Mr. Paul Caranci.
Hi, Greg.
How's it going, Paul?
Terrific, thanks.
Nice to meet you. Paul and I were acquainted from a recent conversation I had with a constable and private investigator, Mr. Mike Clementi, who you know for many years.
We're lifelong friends. We grew up together in Centerdale.
Gotcha. And I was asking Mike, I said, Mike, I want to interview somebody that is Rhode Island born and bred, and somebody that has given back to the community and has been involved with the community. And Mike said, you need to meet Paul, so here we are.
Terrific. Well, I'm glad he mentioned me, and I'm glad I'm here.
Absolutely, and the reason why we're here is because you're an author of many books, okay? I think you said 12 and 13 and 14 are coming.
Yes.
And just to show you one of them here that Paul autographed for me, it's called Scoundrels, okay? It's defining corruption through tales of political intrigue here in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
So Paul, a lot to unpack here.
Okay, let's get to it.
Let's get to it, and I want to get to it first by taking it back decades to when you said you were 13 years old and you got involved with the community, with the political scene.
Yeah.
Tell us about your involvement and how it got started and what was your motivation.
Okay, well, at 13, it was just something to do. There wasn't any real motivation. I am rather conservative and have been most of my life, so I was looking for something to do when I was 12, 13 years old, and right around that time Richard Nixon was running for president, 1968, and he had some interesting things to say that intrigued me as someone who would be probably getting ready for the draft in another 4 or 5 years. So I was attracted to his anti-war speech, even though he didn't turn out to be such an anti-war candidate in his first term. But I was attracted to the things he was saying, and thought the best way to end the Vietnamese War would be to win it quickly and get out. And obviously it didn't happen. But I thought, he'd be somebody that would be good for the country, good for me personally, because hopefully if the war ended before I turned 18, I wouldn't have to worry about being drafted and going off to Vietnam. So I just did small things. I passed out leaflets and that kind of thing for him. It was nothing spectacular. But it gave me a taste for the political system and how things work, and it was fun. I mean, as a 13-year-old, that's fun stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Campaigning for the president.
Yeah, it was just fun. And so I got a taste for it, and I stayed involved in the political process locally. I didn't work for other presidential candidates, but local council candidates and mayoral candidates, and Sal Mancini was running to be the first mayor of North Providence at the time. That was in '73, but I worked for him and other local candidates for council, and right through college, when I started college, and I met a gentleman named Frank Darrigan. Frank was I met him at Providence College. He was there shaking hands with students. And he was everything you would look for in a politician. Youthful, energetic, good-looking guy. He was a polished speaker, and he could excite a group of people when he spoke to them. And he certainly excited me with the things he wanted to do for Providence. So I was attracted to his campaign almost immediately, and I jumped on that. And I worked for him. Unfortunately, he also lost. He ran against Buddy Cianci that year. That was Buddy's first campaign. So Buddy was elected, and Frank Darrigan ran against him 2 years later, I think it was, or 4 years later. And I worked for Frank Darrigan again, ran his headquarters that time. So I was, taking positions of a little more responsibility with each campaign. And then I managed some local campaigns, and at that point I was just hooked. I had the political bug, and I decided that as soon as I graduated college, I wanted to run. So I did. I ran myself for town council in North Providence in 1984, and I lost. I ran in 86, and I lost. And I ran again in 92. I had needed a couple of years off after 86. And I lost again. But the interesting thing was I had a message that was on point. And although the message wasn't received necessarily well in North Providence, I mean, maybe it wasn't how my message was received. Maybe it was that I was so young and inexperienced.
Gotcha. That
was a turnoff to some voters. But whatever the case was, my message was on point. And the reason I knew that is, this I talk about in my book Wired. I found out that North Providence had a municipal landfill. Now, a landfill is where you throw the garbage. And most cities and towns had to use the central landfill in Johnston, which charged $32 a ton to dispose of municipal waste there. That's very expensive when a community has, hundreds of thousands of tons over the course of time. So North Providence had its own municipal landfill, a huge commodity. And so much so that the state legislature passed a law saying that North Providence landfill could only be used to dispose of residential waste generated in North Providence, because they didn't want to fill it up with commercial waste or out-of-town waste. So, and that saved our town a lot of money. Well, I knew, because I worked at the time at Rhode Island Solid Waste Management Corporation, which ran the central landfill in Johnston. I knew how to tell a commercial truck from a truck that was residential and went door to door. Those, if you remember, those old trucks that two people stood on the back of it, and the garbage went in the back. They emptied the barrel in. Some companies still use those. And then commercial truck was what they call a top loader. It picked up the container and it brought it over the top of the truck and dumped the garbage in. So you couldn't mistake those two trucks. And I knew that there were commercial trucks going into the North Providence landfill. And because I had followed them, I knew that there were trucks that were picking up in Providence and then going to North Providence landfill. So we were getting commercial and out-of-town commercial, which was a double
whammy.
Well, I used that as a campaign issue in my 1984 campaign. And I don't think too many people believed it. And the mayor
for council.
For town council.
Gotcha.
And the mayor came out and said that that I was simply wrong. It wasn't happening. And so, okay, I lost the campaign, and that was the end of that. Except during the campaign, I called a reporter, Greg Smith from the Providence Journal. I think he may still be reporting. And I asked him if he would be interested in taking a ride with me one morning, early, 6 o'clock in the morning, to follow a truck, watch it pick up commercial waste, and then go to the landfill. And he said, yeah. So we set an appointment to do that on a particular day, and it turned out to be a cold, nasty day. So I went, he didn't show up. And the truck came, and I followed the truck myself. But because it was still dark at 6 o'clock in the morning, and because my headlights were the only lights on the road other than the garbage truck, the driver knew immediately that I was following him. He stopped the truck, got out, and he got a club from his car, and he came over to my driver's side window and was banging on the window saying, if you don't stop following me, I'll kill you, and he used a couple of nice expletives in there. He scared me pretty good. And, I did what any self-respecting council candidate would do at that moment. I got out. I ran. But I knew that it was going on. I just had no proof. And without the reporter seeing it, there was no way to show it. But an interesting thing happened. That took place in January of 1984. In February of 1984, a gentleman by the name of Gelato Mastachio, Sr., from Cranston, and Mr. Olivo, first name Joseph, I think, Joseph Olivo, out of Providence, were involved in a narcotics ring in Providence, and around the same time, the cops were kind of closing in on them, and Mastraccio knew that. So he was concerned that if they were caught, Olivo might start talking.
Yep.
And he knew that he might talk about a murder that Olivo committed, but they were both involved in.
Gotcha.
So he got a couple of his men together, and they went and shot Olivo in the head with a shotgun, and then cut up his body with a chainsaw and put the body parts in various garbage bags.
In the
threw
city?
Those bags, yeah. And threw those bags in various dumpsters in the city of Providence.
Just like Jennifer Dulos. You
Really?
hear about that
No.
case? In Connecticut, the housewife that went missing, the husband is suspected to be the killer.
Yeah.
He put her alleged remains in Hartford in different trash bags,
Really?
and they went searching the dump. Sorry to interject,
I tell you,
but
there's nothing new in history.
it just repeats itself.
I think it was Henry David Thoreau that said, "There's no new history, just old history with new dates."
Yes, it.
So anyway, about a month later, in March, the North Providence police are digging in the North Providence landfill, and they find the garbage bags with the body parts from Olivo in them.
Wow.
So it wasn't until June of 1995 that a reporter writing for the Providence Journal, C.J. Shivers, who went on to write for the New York Times, wrote an article saying, if North Providence landfill is reserved for North Providence residential waste, then how did garbage bags with the body parts of Olivo that were dumped in a Providence dumpster end up in the North Providence?
And you're like, hey, 7 years ago I told you about this.
So it was it was vindication.
Yep.
It didn't do much to get me
Right.
elected, but it was vindication. At that point, Mastraccio was in jail, Olivo was still dead, and the landfill had been closed through a series of consent decrees with the Department of Environmental Management. So it was old news, but it showed that I was on the right path, and it showed that driver that got out of the truck and threatened me might have killed me if
You might end up in a bag.
Exactly. So who knew that running for council could be hazardous to your health, right? So anyway, that was my early experience. But then in 1994, there was a series of special elections. Mayor Mancini passed away at that point. There was a special election for mayor. My councilman, Louis Lanny, had an issue and resigned from the council and from his position as vice principal of the high school. And it opened up a council seat. And then another councilman from the 3rd district resigned because he was moving out of town. And he had a special election in that seat. So I ran again in '94 in the special election. And that's when I was elected for the first time by a whopping 23 votes.
Wow.
It was a 9-man race, and I won by 23 votes. And then
So you were 39 at that time.
probably that was 1994. Yeah.
So it took, or you're trying to tell me the public maybe doesn't take somebody serious until they're middle-aged. Like you ran as a youngster.
Maybe didn't take me serious. Other people got elected at a very young age. Jeffrey Tights, I think, got elected at 18 years old as a state representative.
Interesting.
John Salona got elected to the town council in North Providence when he was 18 years old. So there are some people, but it could have been a combination of the message. It could have been my age, my inexperience, and it could have just been that the people that I was running against were so entrenched that I couldn't move them. And maybe it was a combination of all those things.
So what's going on now? You're 39, you get elected for the first time. Keep going. We're in the mid-90s now, right?
Yep. I got elected, and there was an interesting situation with my elections that year. And I say elections because I had 4 of them in 5 months. I had a primary for the special election, which I won, and then I had the regular, the general election for the special election. which I won.
Mm-hmm.
So now I am elected to fill the seat of the vacating councilman,
Yep.
which expired in January. So in September, I had to have another primary for the 4-year term. And then in November, another general election for the 4-year term. So basically I had a July election, an August election, a September election, and a November election. So 4 elections in 5 months. And fortunately I won all of them. And once I was on the council, I started immediately with implementation of the platform I had developed when I was a candidate. And that included what I thought was some innovative things. And I detail all of that in white. I don't want to bore you with the minutiae of town government, but from things like addressing the speeding issues to trash collection and revamping of taxes and the tax structure and all of those kind of things, I had proposals for.
Yep.
Even expanded recycling efforts in the town. Eventually put forward a plan for pay as you throw, they call it. It's you pay for what you dispose of.
Yep.
So if you recycle 100% of your waste, you get no bill.
Right.
If you don't recycle anything, you're going to have
Higher
to buy
bill.
garbage bags to put your waste in. But what it does is it rewards people who recycle and compost. And it doesn't penalize, but it makes people who don't pay the full freight.
Right.
So you can control your bill, just as you do with your electric bill. You can control it by how much, you want to
Keep a knob on it.
Yeah, you're going to pay a lot. You're going to put the heat on 68, you're going to pay less. So you get to control the bill. And I thought that would be a unique way to handle trash bill as well, but it didn't go over. It still hasn't.
People hate that.
Some towns do it, but our town wasn't ready for it.
North Attleboro, where I used to live, we did that.
Yeah.
It was like $1 a bag or something.
Yeah,
It was
exactly.
like a 13-gallon bag, and then Fall River actually did that, and then former Mayor Jaser Correa removed that.
Yeah.
Because the public was like,
And then they removed him.
correct. So it's interesting how that small little $2 a bag, $1 a bag makes people flip out.
We do it currently in Rhode Island with the brown bags for leaves and yard waste. It's the same thing. You got to buy those bags. I think they're quarter, 30 cents.
Yeah.
And you put your yard waste in them. And people have no problem doing that. But when it comes to the regular garbage, there's a hesitance. I don't know why. Because most stuff can be recycled or composted. And most people have a garden in the backyard where they can do that. But and anyway, it didn't go. And but it was, I thought, innovative, and I wanted to propose it. So I get on the council, and I'm on for 17 years roughly in total. It was just under 17 years.
Uninterrupted.
Special election. Yeah.
So you're on
I had
there.
to run every 4 years, and
Gotcha.
I was on for 17, or just under 17 again. It was 16 and change because that special election gave me an extra few months in office. So, but it was around 2009. So I'm not sure where that falls in my chronology. Maybe I was 13 years on the council. When I got some information that some of my colleagues were on the take. Now, I had long suspected that there was something going on just because of the way they voted. And with different councilmen, it seems to be systemic, because it was councilmen who were no longer on the council in 2009 that I first suspected. But I couldn't prove anything, and I was busy with my own programs and trying to propose some positive things for the town, not really worrying about the negatives and trying to catch somebody doing something wrong.
Right,
That wasn't my
you're
motivation.
busy.
Yeah. But in 2009, or by 2009, it got to the point where it was really impacting my constituents. And that happened with the 2 projects. One was a Stop and Shop project that they wanted to put right across the street from the high school. Now, it's on land that the former ABC, Bagamian Bus Junkyard, used to be on. The neighbors that abut that property fought long and hard to have that lot cleaned up once Bagamian moved out. And they had it rezoned, or they requested it be rezoned, and the council complied and rezoned it from the industrial site that it was, heavy commercial, to a residential zone. So it could have been single or multifamily residentials. And everybody was happy. Along comes the developer who wants to put a Stop and Shop, super Stop and Shop out there. And my concern was, one, those neighbors. It just got rid of a nightmare, and now they're going to be impacted again negatively. And two, the traffic conditions at Middle Spring Avenue.
Miserable
So,
Spring
it's
Avenue.
horrible. And if you drive on a Saturday, you'd know that you're backed up from the Johnston line in Cinnadale all the way down to Douglas Avenue and beyond. all the way up to
Half
Merivale.
hour.
Yeah. A half hour to go 3 miles.
Right.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And I knew this wasn't going to make it better. I didn't know how much worse it would make it, but I
Right.
knew it wasn't going to make it better.
Correct.
So I was opposed to the project as soon as it was proposed. But one of the councilmen called me and said, would you come and meet with the developer? And we can't meet as an entire council because it would violate the open meetings law.
Gotcha.
But what we can do is meet in groups of 3, as long as you don't have a majority.
And
of
how
the
many
council
council
meeting.
members
There
are
was
there?
7.
7.
So 4 would have been a violation.
Less than half is okay.
Yeah, well, ostensibly it's okay. He thought it was okay. My feeling is, if you're doing it for the purpose of avoiding the transparency and avoiding the open meeting laws, then it's not okay.
Shouldn't be doing it.
Right, but it was one of those things that is probably not okay, but it was legal.
Gotcha.
So we went. The council president and the 2 councilmen from each district went in 3 different meetings. And we met with the developer, who laid out a beautiful plan. You know, the plan's always beautiful. They
Perfect.
have the green trees and the water, blue water from the retention ponds they're going to
There's
build.
dogs in the grass.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. But it never turns out that way. But we looked, and it was impressive. And the developer said one thing that caught my attention. He said, the neighbors support this. Now, hey, listen, I'm a councilman over there. I know that the neighbors aren't going to be supporting it because I know how hard they fought to change the zone. So I was skeptical. And I said, are you sure the neighbors support it? Oh, the neighbors support it. I said, I haven't gotten one call indicating support for the project. He said, well, we talked to them all, and they're on board now. Okay. So we left the meeting, and I checked with some of the neighbors who said, no, we don't know anything about it. We're not.
Yeah, we hate that.
So they quickly organized a group led by former Judge Thomas Calderon, who has since passed. But he lived in that condominium complex, and he organized a group, a very well organized group, and he was their spokesman. And they opposed it with intensity.
Vehemently, yeah.
So we have several meetings, and the project keeps getting bumped further and further out. The vote on the project keeps getting pushed further and further out because of problems that arise with neighbors or whatnot. And finally, and I know something's going on because I keep talking to the councilman and saying, hey, this is going to make a bad traffic situation worse. You're going to have cars coming out from the high school and from the other side of Stop and Shop at the same time. This is going to aggravate all the neighbors that live there. It's going to depreciate their property values after they work so hard to finally get some value after the junkyard moved out. Nobody's in favor of this thing. There are people on the other side of town in the other district that are opposing it. I said, it's just not something we should be doing. And they kept making excuse after excuse why it's the right thing to do. So I knew something was there, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But I just said, well, listen, I'm not going to support it.
Yeah.
You guys do what you got to do.
Sure.
And that's how we left it. But then we went to a conference, National League of Cities conference in Florida. And I think there were 4 other councilmen and myself that went. And we had dinner one night at P.F. Chang's restaurant in Orlando. And after dinner, we were going to head out for drinks. I took my wife on that trip, my expense.
Yeah.
And and we went back to the hotel, and they were supposed to call us when we were going to go out for drinks. I don't drink anyway, but I just the camaraderie, I guess. And they never called. So my wife and I ended up staying at the hotel. They ended up going to the Blue Heron restaurant and getting drinks there. Well, the other 4 councilmen were there. There were 5 of us in total. So the other 4 were there. And one of them stands up, puts his arm around the other 2, and says, in the presence of the 4th councilman, who wasn't involved in this, "Boy, you think we're going to vote on that Stop and Shop project in December? I was really counting on the money for Christmas." Well, that's a little conclusive evidence.
And the 4th guy...
The 4th guy knew, and we talked after, and he told me what he overheard. In my mind, that cemented what I suspected.
You thought.
At the same time that that's going on, there's another project that's being developed in town. It's the Lowe's Building Supplies at the corner of Douglas and Mill Street, also in my council district, because the Stop and Shop project's right up the top of the hill.
On the right.
That. So on that project, the Lowe's project, there's a side street that's called Rockwell Street. That's right behind Lowe's. As you're going up the hill in Old Spring, you would take a right on Rockwell. The project is going to abut Rockwell Street. So to make the project more palatable to the neighbors, the developer decides to buy Lowe's decides to buy all of the properties on the east side of Rockwell Street. So all the properties that would have abutted. And that way they're not complaining neighbors anymore.
Right.
And it's only about maybe 8 houses on the street. It's a dead-end street. So they buy those 8 houses. But the houses across the street on the west side of Rockwell Street are still going to be looking over at Lowe's. So they come up with this beautiful plan again, where they assure me that, and I say me, it was assure the council, but the District 1 councilman, of which I was one, in particular, because it was our district. They assured us that they would take measures to mitigate the impact, the adverse impact on those neighbors. What are they going to do? Well, we're buying all that land. They've now got 100 feet of land, basically, between the street and the property line. And they're going to put a retaining wall up on the Lowe's end, which is there today. It's a stone retaining wall. Very nice looking. On top of the retaining wall, they're going to put arborvitaes, 6-foot tall arborvitaes. In front of behind the arborvitaes, between the wall and the arborvitae, is going to be a stockade fence, 6 feet high. So when they're going to keep that whole area where they remove the houses grassed and with trees. So they said when the neighbors look out from across the street, they're going to see the park area.
Yeah.
And they're never going to see over the fence or over the arborvitae to see the roof of Lowe's. Okay. With that, the neighbors said, okay, we don't have an objection. The council, if the neighbors are happy with it, the council's happy with it. We could certainly use the tax base in town.
Yep.
So we're okay with it. And Lowe's was okay with it. So I get to one council meeting, and I think it might have also been January or February meeting. And the representative from Lowe's says, we need to get an easement on Rockwell Street. And the council has to grant the easements. So I said, why do you need an easement on Rockwell Street? He said, well, we need to put, and there's an engineering name for these things, but if you build like a wall out of railroad ties, say, every now and then you have to put one going perpendicular, and that's underground, and you fill that in, and that holds the wall in place. Yep. And the layman term is dead men that you're putting in. So I forget his term, but we need a series of dead men that are going to be on Rockwell Street. And I said, well, how long are these dead men? Oh, they're not long, maybe 10, 20 feet long. I said, okay, well, from where the wall is, you just purchased 100 feet of property. Why would the easement be on Rockwell Street 100 feet if it's only a 20-foot beam going in?
Right.
He said, oh, no, the wall's moved. I said, the wall what? He said, well, the wall's moved closer to Rockwell Street. I said, no, I haven't seen those plans. He says, oh, yeah, we changed it. And I said, well, I said to the chairman, I think we need to postpone this meeting until we see the plans where the new wall location is.
That's the whole purpose of this.
Right. I mean, everybody was on board only because of
space,
the 100-foot buffer zone.
Right.
So the chairman said, no, we need to vote on this right away. They're going to walk from the project if they don't get the easement. I think they got $1 million investment here. They're not walking anywhere if we postpone this for a week or two.
Right.
No, we got to do it right away. I said, well, I'm not going to support this. I promised the neighbors I would have their back on this, and I'm not going to just allow you to change the plan without them knowing it. He said, no, well, you're out of order, and he gavelled me down, and they passed it. I think it passed 6-1.
So this was public.
Yeah, it's public.
You were like, whoa, what's going on? And they're like, nope.
So I left there so mad.
Phew.
And I'm thinking, these people are going to think I betrayed them.
Yes.
Tell them what they want to hear until they, give consent, and then do what we want. And,
At the drop of a hat.
So I went home, and I was complaining to my wife about, which I did practically after every meeting, how terrible this is, and how people are being taken advantage of, and I can't do this anymore, and this has to stop. And these guys are just, corrupt, and they have no regard for the best interests of the town or the people. And we took an oath to protect their interests and preserve the town's property value and all these things, and they're not doing any of it.
Right.
And I'm just, ranting and raving. And she finally says,
and this was after Blue Herring incident?
Yes.
How much after?
Actually, the Lowe's project was just before it. It was just before Blue Herring.
Okay.
Because she said to me at that point, maybe it's time to go to the FBI.
Wow.
Because I had been saying for a while, if the FBI knew what was going on, but she said, maybe it's time to go. So I said, now, do you know what you're saying? This is going to change our lives if we do this kind of thing. And we talked about it. We talked about it for the whole night. And what we finally decided was, we knew that if I went to the FBI, maybe there's a chance I could lose my job.
Yeah.
There's a chance that I'd lose a lot of friendships.
Yep.
There's a chance that I couldn't get another job and I'd have to move out of state.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, if we didn't expose the corruption simply because we wanted to preserve the lifestyle that we had, that's really not much different than the guys who are on the take doing it to enhance their lifestyle.
Correct.
Enhancement, preservation is not much difference. You're both concerned about your
You would
lifestyle.
be conspiring.
Yeah. So there was, at that point, and when looking at it that way, there was really no choice. So
pause right there,
yeah.
okay? I told some folks, I said, I'm going to be interviewing Paul Caranci. And they say, Paul is a rat. Okay? And the point, and that what you've just led up to is why I'm segueing, is because the rat, that's not what Paul did. Paul was a public servant. Paul was looking at the public good. Paul was abiding by the oath of your responsibility. So Paul is not a rat. Paul was taking his life and more and putting it all on the line for people that didn't even know what you were doing for them. Like, you're helping the community, and at that time they have no idea the risk you're taking for their benefit. So I just wanted to say that publicly because
I appreciate that. Thank you.
People have said that to me, and I said, you got it backwards.
And I still get it all the time. I mean, but the mentality in Rhode Island, especially among the Italian American population, seems to be a little bit of that mafia mentality, where you don't turn people in, you don't cooperate with the police, you don't, you just look the other way.
Silence.
But you know what? I was raised Italian American by Italian American parents in an Italian American household in an predominantly Italian American town. Certainly, my neighborhood was Italian American, and I don't know anybody in that area that was raised to do that.
Right.
You cooperate with authority. You do what's good for the town. You don't hurt people. And so I don't know where that comes from, but it's out there, and I get it all the time too.
Yep. Yeah. So back to the story.
Okay. So in fact, one side note, when I went back to my first council meeting after the whole FBI thing came out, there was somebody holding up a Chuck E. Cheese sign.
Yeah,
so
I read
Chuck
that.
Chuck E. Cheese is back on the bench. And I got some hate mail that included Chuck E. Cheese. But anyway, I thought Chuck E. Cheese was a good guy.
He was. Our kids go and hang out there, yeah.
That's right. In any case, my wife knew someone that went through her law school. My wife's a clinic administrator at Roger Williams Law School in the Providence office. And she knew someone that worked for the FBI that went through the clinic. So she called that person for me, and they put me in touch with the local field representative. And I met with him at Panera Bread in Cranston. And I'll never forget that day because I was scared to death meeting with somebody from the FBI.
Yeah.
You know, that's
It's not something you want to do, yeah.
You want to stay away from those people. You don't
Yeah.
want to hang out with them. And he told me, he took all the information, and he said, you want to stop this? And I said, yes. And he said, well, you're going to need to wear a wire then. And I said, I don't want to do that. And he says, it's the only way to do it. He said, we can play around with this, but you're not going to get convictions. You're not going to stop it unless you wear a wire. We got hard evidence against them. So I thought about that for a while, and then I said, okay.
How long's a while?
Well, it's funny because in my recollection, I thought about it overnight. But apparently that's not the case because the FBI agent, Jim Pitcavage is his name, told me that it was the same meeting that I agreed, which is later on in the meeting, so probably within the hour.
Okay.
But it seems to me I certainly thought about it long and hard, maybe after I committed to wear it, because I know I agonized over it for a long time. But I probably already made the commitment to wear it and made a decision to move forward because it had to stop. I talked to these guys beforehand. I never went up to them and said, hey, look, if you don't stop this, I'm going to go to the FBI. But I talked to them about how their actions were having a negative impact on the town. And how they were hurting the people that we're supposed to be helping. And each time I approached them on it, they would just laugh and say, you're crazy, you got it all wrong. And they were so convincing that you'd walk away sometimes and say, maybe I misjudged.
Maybe I'm out of line.
But now I knew I wasn't. Actually, I think this was, trying to get the timing right. It was January. It was January of 2009. Or maybe it was, no, it wasn't. I'm sorry, it was before that. No, it was either December or January. No, it had to be January because I didn't start in 2008. So January 2009. And I told them I would wear the wire, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how I was going to, insert myself into this thing because nobody really included me in this stuff. They didn't talk to me about it, obviously.
You just got like orbiting information almost.
Yeah, and this was pure accident that I got that information from Florida. But what they said is you're going to have to insert yourself into the conspiracy, and we'll coach you and tell you what you need to do or how you need to do it. And
you won't be liable or a co-conspirator, right?
No,
like
that's
they make
correct.
that clear, like, hey, you can engage and kind of participate, and you have immunity in a sense.
Yeah, as long as I did it, I had to sign this long list of what they call admonishments.
Okay.
And it was, I won't go off on my own and try to investigate. I won't do this and I won't. And it was a list of things I had to do. And as long as I did everything on that list and didn't deviate from it, I couldn't be charged with anything. But if I went off and did something that wasn't authorized by them, now I'm operating outside of it, and then I'd be considered a conspirator possibly. But I didn't. I was very careful because I was so scared of this whole thing. So anyway, I talked to Jim about how to insert myself. He and another agent came over the house. They wanted me to call one of the councilmen and tell him that I overheard what he said in Florida. And they asked me if I thought he would remember that I wasn't there at that when they were having drinks. I didn't think that was a problem because, one, he obviously had a few too many drinks, or he wouldn't have said what he said in public. So, I knew that he was probably a little bit impacted by the drinks. And it was also a couple of months that had passed, and with the passage of time, I knew that he'd remember that I was around at some part of the night, but wouldn't remember exactly when he said this.
Correct.
So he might be thinking it's possibly that he said it when I was there at dinner, as opposed to with drinks. So I didn't think that'd be a problem. So they said, then just tell him you overheard him say that, and you need money. Times are tough, and if they can cut you in, you'd be their fourth vote. You only need 4 votes. So with the 3 of them, they had to convince one other councilman to go their way, which generally wasn't too hard. But now they wouldn't even need that. So I called him, and he was hesitant, saying, what are you talking about? What compensation? What did I say in Florida? And I told him what he said, and he didn't say anything. And then he said, well, I got to talk to the others. I'll let you know. So the FBI clearly knew now that
we got something
going on, yeah. So that was recorded, but that was a phone call. I had to go to Washington for a conference in early February, and that's when I was supposed to be getting the phone call from John, one of the councilmen, saying whether or not I was in, if the other guys accepted me or not. And they gave me a recorder to use, just a regular cassette recorder. But you haven't used those things in so long.
Yeah.
You got to hit play and record at the same time to record. And I must not have. I was so nervous when the call came in. I ran up back to the room from the conference, and I must have just hit play.
Gotcha.
And it didn't record the conversation. Fortunately for me, it wasn't he wasn't saying that I talked to the others and you're in.
Okay.
So I didn't miss anything of importance. It was just asking some other unrelated questions. So, but I did have to lie to the FBI about that. I probably the only person that lied to the FBI and got away with it. But yeah, I was so embarrassed that I botched such a simple assignment that I said, I just couldn't get to the back to my room in time, and I didn't record it.
Gotcha.
Later, I fessed up and told him that I.
You were embarrassed. Yeah.
So anyway,
and they said, hands behind your back.
Yeah. The next few days, I did get the call saying, why don't you meet me at Dunkin' Donuts when you get back? Now, the meeting was going to be on the 10th, and I was getting back on the 10th. So I had to fly back, get home, change, go meet him at Dunkin' Donuts, and then go to the council meeting. And we met at Dunkin' Donuts, but he said he wanted to take a ride. And I'm thinking, oh boy, I thought we were going to be in the donut shop. The FBI had wired me all up with the recorder and the video button. And I went to Dunkin' Donuts, and I sat under the light so it would be,
right,
good enough for the recording.
Yep.
And he came in, he said, come on, let's go. And we got in his van. But then he said, let's just stay here and talk. So fortunately, I didn't know where he was going to take me and if I was going to be frisked when I got there.
Right.
So I was nervous. But we didn't go anywhere. We stayed in the parking lot. He told me everything, how it would play out. You vote with us tonight, you get $4,000. We're getting this much money. I forget what it was, $20,000.
From the development of Lowe's or Stop and Shop?
This was Stop and Shop.
So Stop and Shop is part of this conspiracy, or the developer?
The developer from Stop and Shop was paying the bribe money.
So did Stop and Shop know? Like their management?
Oh, I don't think it was a developer. There was no Stop and Shop yet. He was
Gotcha.
just going to build a building for them.
Gotcha.
And I'm sure the management of Stop and Shop had no idea.
Gotcha.
But the developer was going to pay a middleman. The middleman was going to deliver the money to the councilman. The councilman was then going to take it and split it with the other two. And then I was going to meet him the following day and get my piece. They were getting more than me because they were in on it from the beginning, and they orchestrated the whole thing. And he explained it all out in detail. So that's how it worked. And then the next day, I voted for it that night. All of those neighbors came from the condos and opposed it. They must have all thought I sold them out because I voted for it.
Wow. So the FBI said we have to, I guess, we have to let it play out even though this negative decision will impact the community. Like
Yes.
they needed to see
Yeah.
that 4 to 7 vote
Right.
to further the evidence. So the community was almost
Yeah.
collateral damage.
Yeah, they needed to see even more than that. My only solace in that part of it was that whether I voted for it or against it, it was going to pass. It was
Gotcha.
either going to be 6-1
Or
or
5 to 2.
nothing.
Or, yeah,
Yeah.
7-0. Right.
And it ended up being 7-0, but it was going to pass anyway. My vote was irrelevant, but by doing
Gotcha.
what I did, I at least stopped the future conspiracies. So, in any case, that was how that played out. That night, he got his money and he went and shared it with the other two. And the next day, I called him up and made arrangements to meet him at his house, and he was going to give me my piece. So again, I had to meet with the FBI, and they wired up my car for with a video camera and recording device, and they had to search me and search my my SUV to make sure that I didn't have. I was supposed to get $4,000, but they got to be sure that the $4,000 came from him and not from me, and I was hiding in the car to set
Right.
him up.
Got it.
So they had to search to make sure that there was no money in my
More
car.
money in your car. Jeez.
Yeah, search me, and this was involved. I mean, every step of the way was so involved, and I'll explain that in a sec when I finish this story. So I drive over to his driveway, and it worked out perfectly because the car was dark inside, but he opened the passenger door.
So the
The
light
light
come.
went on, and without getting in and closing the door, he leans over and hands me. It goes 2,000, 4,000, and he gave me 2 stacks of 20 strapped together. So I got the money. The FBI said, "Don't handle the money. Just grab it as
Minimally as
you can.
possible.
Put it in your pocket for fingerprints." They were trying to trace where it came from. They knew John was giving it to me. That's on camera, but they wanted to trace where it came from.
Further.
And I thought I did that, but when you watch the video after, I was doing this with the money.
Gotcha.
I was
Contaminating
just
it.
nervous. Yeah, I just flipped it all around. I was nervous. And this wasn't my thing. I'm not an FBI agent.
Yeah.
I'm a councilman.
You're a councilman.
So this was new stuff for me. So I put it in my pocket eventually, and I left. Now I got to meet the FBI to give them the money. Now when you do that, there have to be 2 FBI agents
Present.
there. And one counts it, then the other counts it, then they bag it, then they seal it, then they both initial it. So I decide when I'm leaving there to be very careful and looking around me. And I notice that this car, as I pull out of his driveway and start going down Fruit Hill Avenue, a car pulls away from the curb and it's following me. So I take this circuitous route, all these side streets, hoping to lose that car, and I don't lose it. It keeps following me. No, I'm thinking it's one of the other council people, and they're just trying to see where I go with this money. So now I'm paranoid and I'm scared. So I pull into, on Middle Spring Avenue, the McDonald's. And I figured that would have been believable to them because we had a council meeting, we just finished it. It was like 8 o'clock or 8:30 at night, and they hadn't eaten supper yet. So
Yeah.
it's believable I might be going in for something to eat. So I pull in, I go to the drive-through line, I call the FBI agent, and he said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm being followed." He said, "I know, that's our guy."
Oh, jeez.
So you could have told me that going
Gotcha.
in,
Fucking yeah.
It scared me to death.
Double scared.
So I pull out, and I go meet him. Our appointed meeting place was the Mary Mother of Mankind Church parking lot.
Wow.
And that's up some side streets.
Yep.
So I go, and I lose the guy that was following me. And now we're there, I'm with the FBI agent, but the other guy's not showing up, and they need him to count the money.
Yeah.
So we're waiting and waiting and waiting, half hour, and finally the FBI agent calls him up and says, "Where are you?" And he said, "I'm lost." So I went and met him somewhere and took him back.
Yeah.
And I said, "Nice to know you guys are following me, and I'm total inexperienced, and I lose you."
Yes. And you're getting lost.
Yeah. So we had a little bit of levity mixed in with all the stress. But they counted the money out, and that was that. Now, I thought I was done at this point. That was only February. I had to do this for another year and change. Wow. So it wasn't until May 6th that the first arrest took place.
May 6th of the next year?
2010, yeah.
Wow.
So I had to wear the wire the whole time. But wearing the wire, it sounds so innocuous, but it was so much work. You can't even imagine. Every time, first of all, this device is only about this big.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a long wire up. One goes into an earpiece if you're on the phone. And if you're not on the phone, the wire, you just detach it and
Gotcha.
the little device stays in your pocket. And it's a recorder. And every time I get a phone call from any of the three councilmen, I had to let the call go into voicemail, find out who it was that was calling, call the FBI agent, tell him I just got a call from so-and-so. He'd say, okay, activate the device.
Mm-hmm.
I would have to turn the device on, give a preamble, it's Paul Caranci, the date, the time, who called me, why I'm turning the device on.
Gotcha.
I'm going to call them back now. They even had to listen as I called them back to hear the dial to make sure I was calling that number.
Wow.
So that had to be recorded. I couldn't call them then turn the recorder on. And then sometimes that call would go into his voicemail. So I'd wait a few minutes, then I'd call the FBI agent back and say he didn't pick up, went into voicemail. Sometimes he'd say leave the recorder on for 5 or 10 minutes, see what happens, and if he doesn't call you back, shut it down. And if he called me back, great. If he didn't call me back, I'd shut it down. But then when he called back, I have to start over, let it go into voicemail, call the FBI, turn it on, preamble,
Yep.
get the call back. Sometimes that could, if it went back into his voicemail, this could go on all
Back
day.
and forth, yeah.
And I'm at the beck and call of this device. There was one time when my wife and I went to dinner here in East Greenwich. It used to be Jason's restaurant, nice restaurant, right off the exit. And we were at dinner, we just ordered our food, and I get a call from one of the councilmen. So I excuse myself, and I have to go to a place where I can get reception now.
Yep.
And I find a place, I drive my car until I can get reception. I find a place, I call the FBI, he instructs me what to do, and I do it, and we go through this whole thing, and it took about 45 minutes or more.
Food's cold now.
I get back, they're all done eating.
Mm-hmm.
Where were you? I can't say where I was.
Right.
So how do you explain yourself, without everybody getting upset? So you got to make something up, Worst case of indigestion.
Yeah.
But that's just how it went, and it went for 17 months like that. It was just amazing. And then there were some times that were very scary when I thought I'd be caught.
Yeah.
But it all came down to I went to Indiana to help a friend of mine who was running for Congress. I worked the polls for him, and while I was in Indiana, my wife went to Baltimore because she had a conference there. So my plan was to go to Indiana, work election day for him, and then go to Baltimore and meet my wife at her conference, and that I was going to take a little vacation.
Yeah.
3 to 4 day vacation. So that's what we did. And while I was in Indiana, I get a call from the FBI agent saying we just arrested one of the councilmen. I'm thinking, well, why did you do that? The second payment on this bribe was due like tomorrow. Why would you arrest him? It was due the following week, I think. And he said, well, we have our reasons. Turned out, what I found out later is they were getting suspicious because their phones at that point were tapped by the FBI. And they started to hear different clicks or whatnot, and they were getting suspicious that...
The councilman.
Yeah. So the FBI had to bring it to a conclusion at that point. So they arrested the one guy in hopes that he would just turn in everybody else. But it didn't happen. So he actually ended up lying to the FBI, so he got convicted of lying to the FBI as well. I did. But anyway, the first arrest happened January 6th. No, I'm sorry, that happened earlier than that. And then I went to Baltimore. It must have been like January 4th. He got arrested. And then on we're in May. May 10th, May 6th was the first arrest. So he probably got picked up on the 4th of May. And then I went to Baltimore after the election and met my wife. And while I was still in bed, it was 6 o'clock in the morning, phone rings. It was the FBI, and he said, I just want you to know that we arrested all 3 councilmen this morning. You're going to be getting a lot of phone calls because I was identified in the documents as CS1, Cooperating Source 1. But he said, you're probably, by process of elimination, people are going to figure out it was probably you. Your answer has to be no comment. You know, confirm or deny, just no comment. And they'll never be able to write that it was you unless you confirm it. So
Correct.
and they didn't, but a couple of papers did speculate that it was me. Well, you know, there were 5 of us at the council conference. 3 of them were arrested. One's me, and the other one was the one that told me. So it was either I told him or he told me. So it was down to us 2. And when they called the other one, he said, it wasn't me.
It wasn't me.
So it was
There you
me.
go.
So anyway, life changed from that moment on. I got a lot of phone calls. I got hate mail. I got my house was vandalized a couple of times. My cars were vandalized constantly. All of the cars, even my mother-in-law's car, who lives with us, the tire slashed right in the driveway. Never had a problem before. I've been there for 20 some odd years. But it was all as a result of this. My office was moved out of the State House into the old mill building where the corporations division was. There was a reorganization in the office, and I lost $35,000 of my salary in the reorganization. Ended up losing a second home I had in Johnston, had to file bankruptcy. Wow. A lot went on as a result of all of this. But in the final analysis, I told Tim White when he interviewed me after this was over, if I had to do it again, given the same circumstances where I had a fiduciary responsibility to constituents, I would do it again in a heartbeat. It's a different situation if you're employed by someone and you find out something's going on. You don't have a fiduciary responsibility then.
Right.
You can choose to leave,
to
deal with it,
private,
or to become part of it, or you have multiple choices. But here, there was only one choice.
Yep.
And either I violate my oath of office and my fiduciary responsibility, or I don't. That was the only choice. And the only way I could not was to do what I did.
Wow.
So that was a long, drawn-out saga. But it led to some great things. I did end up, when my job ended in 2015, having to move because I couldn't find another job here. So I did go to Indiana, and I went to work for that congressman that I helped get elected. And I was only there, I was supposed to be there for a year, but I only could last 6 months. It was just the worst experience of my life, being away from everybody. I left the house. At the time I left, my son and my daughter were both living with me. Their kids, 4 of them in total, my mother-in-law, my wife, and my dog.
Wow.
I went from that chaos to a 3-room apartment where I lived alone.
Yep.
I worked in an office that 3 other people worked in, but 2 were on the road almost all the time, so again, almost alone.
Yeah.
And I went from chaos to loneliness, and I couldn't handle it.
Right.
It was awful. So that was how I told the congressman I just wasn't happy, and he said, yeah, I could sense it. He said, go home, you're a wimp. So I did. I packed up and came home after 6 months. And that's when I started writing. Well, I started writing before then, but that's when I started writing seriously, full-time writing.
And what of the series of 12 so far of books you've written, what number is this?
That is 5. I wrote 6. It's number 6. I wrote, the first book was A History of North Providence, called North Providence, a history and the people who shaped it. Second book was The Hanging and Redemption of John Gordon, the last execution in Rhode Island. The third book was a primer on how to do real estate, how to get for sale by owners to list with you.
Yep.
I was in real estate for a number of years as well, still have my license. And I made a lot of money doing that, listing for sale by owners.
Yeah.
So people used to say all the time, why don't you write down your secrets in a book? And so I did. A short book, but I did that. Then I wrote a book on how to run for local office. something I knew a little bit about.
Yeah.
And that was my fourth. My fifth book I wrote with my daughter while I was in Indiana. And she did a lot of the work that had to be done here. And that's called Monumental Providence, and it's a history of all the monuments and memorials in the city of Providence. And then this was my sixth. Wired was my seventh. Then I wrote 3 religious books. I wanted to get away from the corruption for a while.
Yep.
I wrote one on Our Lady of Fatima, one on Our Lady of Lourdes, and the third on Our Lady of Guadalupe, and that was 7, 8, 9.
Gotcha.
Then I wrote Terror in Wichita, that was 10. And then I wrote Before the End of the Age, Signs of the Coming Chastisement. That was 12, so I missed one in there somewhere.
It's okay. We won't hold you
All
to
right.
it. And you got 13 and 14 coming, right?
Yeah, I'm working on the 2 now simultaneously. They're early in research and writing stages,
Awesome.
so I don't expect those to be out. One probably the end of the year, and then the other one shortly after that.
Awesome.
Unless I do pick up that Foxes and Fossils project, which might take precedence. I might have to
Yep.
put the other 2 aside and work
Back
on
burner.
that, because that would be something that would run out right away while the fire's hot.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you dedicating this to me. He writes, to Greg, with hope that one day we will all stand up to political corruption of all types with an eye toward...
Can't read my writing.
You're like a doctor. Is it purity? Providing the good government that we all deserve. So we're going to end on that, Paul.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And if the folks at home want to get in touch with you, how do they do so?
Well, if they want to get in touch with me for reasons other than hate mail,
Yep.
then they can reach me at my website, www.paulcaranci.com, or my email, which is municipalheritage@gmail.com. Or most people know where I live.
There you go. And you're able to purchase books online, right?
Yes, these are available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and in a lot of local bookstores.
Awesome.
From Stillwater Books in Pawtucket, right
Yep.
near you.
Yep.
Wakefield Books in Narragansett, Books on the Square in Providence, Cellar Stories Bookstore, you name it, Tally's Books, Gabriel's Trumpet, La Salette, a lot of local stores.
Awesome. Again, Paul, thank you so much for sharing your
pleasure.
story,
Thank you.
and thank you for your public service. A guy like you is a dying breed, I think.
Well, let's hope not.
Hope not. And once again, if you have any questions or comments for me, throw them in the field below. I'll get right back to you. This is Greg from Nexus Property Management, your property managed.